A single mother, abandoned in her darkest hour, suddenly inherits a crumbling mansion hundreds of miles away. But the gift comes with a condition that could either save her family or destroy them completely. A man, once thought lost, may hold the key to her survival, yet enemies from her past return, demanding everything she has left. Would you walk away from the only home you know, even if it means risking everything for a chance at hope? What would you sacrifice if the law, betrayal, and even blood ties turned against you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories of resilience and justice move you, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and help us bring more voices to life. The kitchen light flickered weakly against the peeling paint of the apartment walls. Sarah sat at the small wooden table, her shoulders bent under the weight of exhaustion. Coins scattered before her like a cruel reminder of what remained. Across the room, her daughter Emily clutched a worn teddy bear, staring with wide, worried eyes. "Mom, why do you always smile when things are so hard?" she whispered. Sarah lifted her gaze, forcing her lips into that familiar curve, though her eyes betrayed the truth. She pulled Emily into her lap, pressing her cheek against her child's hair. "I don't smile because I'm happy. I smile so you can feel safe, so your grandma won't think she's a burden and give up. I smile because I can't let myself cry." Emily didn't understand, but she hugged her tighter. In the bedroom beyond, Sarah's mother, Martha, lay still, her fragile breath echoing through the silence. The draft seeped through the cracked window, and the chill crept over Sarah's skin, but she only wrapped her arms more firmly around her daughter, as if defying the world outside. She glanced once more at the scattered coins, then closed her eyes, holding on to the only warmth left in her life. The night dragged on like a weight pressing against Sarah's chest. In the silence of the cramped apartment, the hum of an old sewing machine filled the air, its rhythm steady but fragile, like a heartbeat on the edge of breaking. Sarah's hands moved quickly, stitching pieces of fabric together, her fingers trembling from fatigue. She had been awake for more than a full day, and her eyes burned from the strain, but she did not stop. Each stitch meant another dollar, another day of medicine, another small chance to keep her family afloat. Behind her, from the dimly lit bedroom, a faint voice broke through. "Sarah," Martha whispered, her tone fragile, heavy with guilt. "I am so sorry for holding you back." Sarah immediately pushed the fabric aside and rushed to her mother's side, brushing damp strands of gray hair from her forehead. "Don't you ever say that," she answered softly, holding her mother's hand. "I'm strong because of you, not in spite of you. You're the reason I keep going." Martha's lips quivered with an attempt at a smile, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Sarah bent down and kissed her mother's temple, whispering, "Rest now. Please rest. I'll take care of everything." She returned to the sewing machine, forcing her hands to move faster, though her body begged for sleep. Her breath grew uneven, and every blink felt heavier than the last. On the table, the half-finished dress lay waiting, mocking her exhaustion with its silent demand. She pressed her foot down, and the needle clattered forward again. Then a sudden knock shattered the fragile quiet. Sarah froze, her heart skipping. It was nearly midnight. Who could be at the door at this hour? She stood slowly, steadying herself on the edge of the table, and opened the door just enough to see the familiar face of Mr. Howard, her neighbor. He stood in the hallway, his arms weighed down by a large bag. "I'm sorry to come so late," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I just got a call from the community center. They need 20 children's aprons sewn by Monday. Nobody works as well as you. Please, will you take this order? There's an advance inside." He held out an envelope, thick with cash. Sarah hesitated, her body aching, her spirit already drained. She wanted to refuse,
But when she looked back at Emily, asleep on the couch, her tiny chest rising and falling in fragile peace, and then at her mother lying helpless in the back room, her decision was made. She swallowed hard and took the envelope. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll do my best." Howard placed the bag inside and gave her a sympathetic smile before turning away. As the door clicked shut, Sarah opened the bag to reveal piles of brightly colored fabric. She exhaled slowly, almost in defeat. 2 more nights without sleep, she whispered to herself. She slid into the chair, placed her foot back on the pedal, and the machine roared to life once more. The fabric slid under her tired hands, and though her vision blurred, she pressed on, because giving up was never an option.
The morning crept in through the cracks of the blinds, a pale light falling across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah's hands still trembled from the long night at the sewing machine, but she forced herself up when she heard the heavy knock at the door. Emily stirred on the couch, clutching her teddy bear closer, and Martha called weakly from the back room, asking who it was. Sarah steadied herself, heart pounding, and opened the door. On the threshold stood the mailman, his cap pulled low, holding out a thick black envelope unlike any she had ever seen. The paper was heavy, with an embossed golden crest pressed into the flap, the kind of letter she had only seen in old movies. "Ma'am, this requires a signature," he said. She signed quickly, her hands unsteady, and when the door shut, the apartment felt even quieter than before. Emily climbed down from the couch, rubbing her eyes. "What is it, Mom?" she asked. Sarah held the envelope to her chest, almost afraid to break the seal. She walked to the table, laid it down carefully, and slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside was a folded letter written on thick parchment. The words swam before her eyes as she read them aloud in a shaky voice. "To Miss Sarah Miller, it is with formal notice that according to the last will of your late Aunt Margaret, you have been named sole heir of her estate located in Boston. This inheritance includes the house and assets contained within, under the condition that you take residence there and assume responsibility for the care of her son David, who is gravely ill." Her breath caught, and the letter slipped from her fingers. Emily's small hand tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, what does it mean?" Sarah sank into the chair, staring at the page as though it were written in another language. Her mother's frail voice broke the silence from the bedroom. "Read it to me, Sarah." Sarah carried the letter to her mother's bedside and read it again. When her voice faltered, Martha reached for her hand with trembling fingers. "David, I didn't even know she had a son." Her mother's lips moved slowly, each word of battle. "You must go," she murmured. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Leave everything? Mom, how could I? This is our life, no matter how hard it is." Martha's grip tightened on her hand. "Hope only comes once," she whispered. Sarah looked toward the window where the morning sun glared against the cracked glass. She thought of Emily's worried eyes, of the endless nights at the sewing machine, of the bills that never stopped coming. Her chest ached with fear and longing all at once. She pressed her forehead against her mother's hand, listening to the shallow breath beneath her fingers. Finally she stood, the letter clutched tight against her chest, and whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Maybe this is the only way." Sarah sold the sewing machine the next morning, her only steady source of income, the clatter of its removal echoing in her chest like a betrayal. The little money she received barely covered a van that agreed to take them east. Emily pressed her face against the window, waving goodbye to the apartment that had been their prison and their shelter, while Martha whispered a faint prayer from the back seat. The van rolled onto the freeway,
its old engine rattling as rain began to beat down against the windshield. Sarah sat with her arm wrapped tightly around Emily, her other hand clasping her mother's frail fingers. Every bump in the road sent a shiver through Marta's body, each groan from her mother's lips twisting Sarah's heart. "Hold on, Mom," she murmured, forcing a calm she did not feel. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his voice kind but serious. "It's a long road to Boston. God watch over you." Sarah only nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Hours dragged on beneath the gray sky. The smell of gasoline and damp upholstery filled the van, mingling with the quiet sobs of a child who was too young to understand, but old enough to feel fear. Sarah rested her chin on Emily's hair and whispered, "We're going to start over, sweetheart. Just a little longer." Emily's small hand squeezed hers, trusting blindly. When the van pulled into a gas station, Sarah stepped outside, her legs stiff, her crutch sinking into a puddle. She stared at the rows of cars streaked with rain, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. The driver filled the tank in silence. She caught her reflection in the glass door of the convenience store, hollow eyes, damp hair clinging to her face, the black envelope still tucked in her coat pocket like a haunting promise. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, the skyline of Boston appeared faint against the storm clouds. Sarah's heartbeat quickened. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, whispering to herself, "This is it." The van turned down narrower streets until, at last, it stopped before a looming house of weathered wood and peeling paint. 2 stories tall, its windows shuttered, its fence leaning as if trying to escape the weight of time. The driver helped Sarah down first, his hand steady under her elbow as she balanced on her crutch. He lifted Martha gently into a borrowed wheelchair, his voice low. "You sure this is the place?" Sarah unfolded the letter once more, her eyes scanning the address for the 100th time. She nodded. "It's here." The van pulled away, leaving them in silence before the broken gate. Sarah tightened her grip on Emily's hand. The child looked up at the house with wide, uncertain eyes. Martha's voice, weak but firm, rose from the chair. "Courage, Sarah." The front steps creaked beneath her as she pushed the door open. The air was heavy, filled with dust and shadows, yet it felt like the threshold of something far larger than she could imagine.
The hinges groaned as Sarah pushed the door wide, the stale air rushing out like a sigh from a house long forgotten. Dust swirled in the thin beam of light cutting through the curtains. Emily clung to her mother's side, her small fingers digging into the fabric of Sarah's coat. Martha's wheelchair creaked behind them as Sarah guided it carefully over the warped floorboards. A voice startled her from the doorway. "You must be Sarah." Sarah turned to see a woman in her 50s, hair pinned back in a neat bun, carrying a grocery sack in her arms. She crossed the threshold with the ease of someone who had been inside many times. "I'm Ruth, from across the street. Your Aunt Margaret was my friend." She set the sack on the counter and brushed the dust from her hands. Her eyes, though kind, held a shadow of worry. "We didn't know she had anyone left." Sarah swallowed, trying to summon words, but Ruth continued. "We thought after she passed only David remained. Poor boy." She lowered her voice. "He's upstairs. Hasn't opened his eyes in 3 years." The weight of those words settled heavy in Sarah's chest. She turned instinctively toward her mother, who met her gaze with silent understanding. Emily tugged again, whispering, "Who's David?" But Sarah had no answer. Ruth gestured toward the staircase. "I can show you." Sarah hesitated, her crutch pressing into the uneven floor. The stairs loomed, steep and shadowed, every step a challenge. Yet something stronger than fear pushed her forward. She nodded and began the climb, gripping the railing with one hand, her other tightening on the crutch. Each board moaned beneath her weight. At the top, Ruth opened a door. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale air. Thick curtains kept out the light, and in the center stood a hospital bed, surrounded by silent machines. Wires and tubes wound around a motionless figure. David lay pale against the pillows, his dark hair spilling across his forehead, his chest rising only with the aid of steady beeps from the monitor. Her breath hitched. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it reached for the bed rail. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered, voice breaking. "But I'm Sarah. I guess I'm here to take care of you now." For a long moment there was nothing but the rhythm of the monitor. Then, so slight she almost doubted it, one of his fingers twitched. Her heart pounded in her ears. She looked back at Ruth, who had seen it too, her lips parting in surprise. Sarah pressed her palm gently against David's cold arm. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Downstairs, Martha called weakly for her daughter, her voice carrying up through the silence of the house. Sarah lingered by the bedside just a moment longer, staring at the man fate had placed in her care. The house groaned as though alive, and in that sound Sarah heard both the weight of burden and the faintest spark of hope. That night, after settling her mother on the sofa and tucking Emily beneath a blanket, Sarah returned to the upstairs room. She opened the desk drawers one by one, searching for anything that might explain the life her aunt had left behind. Old bills, faded photographs, handwritten notes filled with lists of medication. Then her hand brushed against a laptop, its surface coated in dust. She hesitated, then pressed the power button. To her surprise, the screen flickered to life without a password. On the desktop were 3 folders. She clicked the one labeled Correspondence. Hundreds of emails filled the screen, but one name, repeated again and again: Lisa. Her chest tightened as she opened a message near the top. The words cut sharp. "David, I'm asking one last time. Sell the house and split the money. If you don't, I'll take you to court. Don't test me." The message was dated a week before his collapse. Sarah shut the laptop quickly, her pulse racing. She turned at the sound of footsteps on the porch below. Emily stirred on the couch as the doorbell rang, loud and sharp against the quiet house. Sarah moved down the staircase cautiously, bracing herself with her crutch, and opened the door. A woman stood outside, tall and poised, her blonde hair falling perfectly against the shoulders of an expensive coat. Beside her was a man in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. The woman's smile was thin, almost mocking. "You must be Sarah," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm Lisa. This is my attorney." Her gaze swept the dusty living room with disdain. "So, Margaret left this place to you. Interesting." Sarah's voice was cautious. "Yes? And who exactly are you to come here uninvited?" Lisa's smile sharpened. "I was David's wife. Technically, since the divorce papers were never finalized, I still have a legal claim, which means half of this property belongs to me." Her attorney gave a slow nod, as if sealing the words with authority. Sarah's grip tightened on her crutch. "This house was left to me in a signed will," she said firmly. "It belongs to my family now." Lisa stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper edged with venom. "The law is complicated, dear. You don't want a battle you can't win. Be smart, sell this house, split the profit, and save yourself the trouble. Think of your daughter. Think of your sick mother." Her heart thundered, rage mixing with fear. Emily appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, and Sarah quickly drew her close, her arm wrapping protectively around the child. "We're not selling anything," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll see you in court." She turned sharply, heels striking the floor like gavel blows, and disappeared into the night with her attorney. When the door shut, Sarah collapsed against it, clutching Emily tightly. Upstairs, the monitor beeped steadily, and she swore she could hear a faint change in rhythm, as if David himself had felt the storm that had just entered their lives. Rain lashed against the windows that evening, the house trembling with each gust of wind. Sarah had just settled Emily with a book when a sudden pounding rattled the front door. Her chest tightened. For a moment she feared Lisa had returned, but when she opened it, the past she thought buried stood before her. Mark. His hair was damp from the storm, his suit wrinkled, but his eyes held that same calculating glint she remembered from the night he walked out. Beside him stood a younger woman, barely more than a girl, her painted lips curling in disdain. "Sarah," Mark began, his voice forced into something resembling kindness, "we need to talk." She froze, gripping her crutch until her knuckles turned white. "How did you find me?" "Lisa," he said simply, brushing water from his sleeves. "She told me about the inheritance, about the house, about David. Since you and I are still married on paper, technically I have rights to half of it. We can settle this peacefully." She let out a bitter laugh. "Peacefully? You left me broken in a hospital bed. You vanished when I needed you most. And now you come back for money?" The young woman at his side stepped forward, arms crossed. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Just sign what's his and we'll leave." Emily peeked from the hallway, eyes wide. Sarah pulled her close with one arm, keeping her safe behind her. She looked back at Mark, her voice sharp. "You forfeited every right the moment you walked away. You don't get to show up with some girl and pretend this is yours." Mark's smile faltered, anger flickering beneath the surface. "Be reasonable, Sarah. You can't fight all of us." Her voice rose, fierce and trembling. "I've been fighting alone for years. For my mother, for my daughter, for myself. And I will not let you steal what doesn't belong to you." She shoved the door wide open, pointing out into the storm. "Get out!" The young woman scoffed, muttering under her breath, but Sarah didn't move. Rain blew inside, cold against her face, yet her stance never wavered. Mark hesitated, his jaw tight, but finally turned away. The door slammed shut behind them, the echo reverberating through the hollow house. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the yard soaked and the air heavy with silence. Sarah stepped outside to bring in the laundry line that had snapped during the night, but her crutch caught on something half buried in the wet grass. She looked down and froze. A torn plastic bag lay open near the back fence, white powder spilling into the mud. Her stomach twisted. She bent carefully, heart racing, and spotted something else glinting nearby. A small black camera, its lens cracked, blinking faintly as if still alive. She snatched it up with trembling hands, pressing the power button. The screen flickered, and a video played. In shaky footage, a man climbed their fence under the cover of darkness. He crouched low, scattering the powder across the soil, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Then, as he turned to leave, the camera slipped from his grasp, tumbling into the dirt. The image froze on his face, one Sarah did not know, but she knew who had sent him. Her breath came shallow. They were trying to frame her. If the police came and found this, everything, her mother, Emily, even David, would be torn away. She rushed back inside, locking the door behind her. Emily looked up from the table, alarmed by the fear on her mother's face. Sarah hid the bag high in the cupboard, clutching the camera as if it were her last weapon. She dialed the local station with shaking fingers.
When the officers arrived, their boots tracking mud through the narrow hall, Sarah handed them the device. One of them watched the footage, his jaw tightening. If you didn't have this, it would be your word against theirs. You could have been charged today. Sarah steadied herself, her voice low but firm. Then you know who's behind it. Don't let them win. The officers exchanged a glance, but gave no promise. When they left, the house felt smaller, the air thick with dread. Sarah leaned against the wall, clutching Emily to her chest. She's whispered, "They'll try again." That night, she sat beside David's bed, the camera resting on the table like a silent witness. She took his hand, cold but steady, and spoke softly. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I swear to you, I won't let them destroy us. Not me, not Mom, not Emily, not you." The faintest pressure answered back, his fingers curling just enough to remind her that she was not alone. The house was cloaked in silence that night, the kind of silence that presses against the chest. Sarah sat by her mother's side until Martha's breathing steadied, then made her way upstairs to check on David. The floor creaked under her crutch, each sound sharp against the hush. As she neared the room, a faint scrape reached her ears. Her heart jumped. The door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open and froze. Lisa was inside, her silhouette bent over the bed. Her hands fumbled at the wires, her face twisted with rage. "If I can't have this house, no one will," she hissed, yanking at the monitor. The machine wailed, alarms breaking the stillness. "No!" Sarah cried, stumbling forward with all the strength she had. She slammed into Lisa, shoving her away from the bed. The two women grappled, Sarah's crutch clattering to the floor as they crashed against the nightstand. Lisa clawed at her arm, trying to break free, but Sarah held on, fueled by terror and fury. "Get out!" Sarah shouted, her voice raw. Lisa sneered, pushing back with surprising force. They stumbled dangerously close to the bed, wires straining. Sarah braced herself against the frame, shielding David with her body. "You will not touch him," she spat. Then, through the chaos, a hoarse voice broke the air. "Enough." Both women froze. Slowly, their eyes turned toward the bed. David was moving, his head lifting weakly from the pillow. His eyes, dull from years of stillness, burned now with a fragile fire. He forced himself upright, leaning on trembling arms. "Leave my house," he rasped, his voice rough but undeniable. Lisa's face drained of color. She staggered back as if struck, her hands trembling. "That's impossible," she whispered. David's gaze held steady, unflinching. "You heard me. Out." For the first time, Sarah saw fear in Lisa's eyes. She stumbled toward the door, nearly tripping over the fallen crutch, and fled into the hallway, her footsteps pounding down the stairs until the front door slammed shut behind her. Sarah turned back, tears blurring her vision. David collapsed against the pillows, his chest heaving, but his eyes remained open, fixed on her. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, clutching his hand. "You came back," she whispered through sobs. "You came back." His lips curved into the faintest smile, and his grip tightened just enough to tell her it was real.
The morning after felt different. For the first time in years, David's eyes were open, his breathing his own. Sarah sat by his bed, her hand never leaving his, when a sharp knock rattled the front door. She hurried downstairs, her heart pounding. 2 police officers stood on the porch, rainwater dripping from their coats. One held a folder thick with papers. "Mrs. Miller," the taller officer said, "we've received a statement from a man tied to last week's break-in. He confessed he was hired. The names he gave were Lisa and Mark. Sarah's breath caught. The officer continued. We also have multiple witness accounts placing Lisa near your property. We're moving forward with arrests today. Before Sarah could reply, voices rose from outside. Neighbors had gathered, drawn by the flashing lights of the patrol cars. Ruth stepped forward, speaking firmly. I saw that woman threaten her. I'll swear to it. Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. Moments later, police cars rolled down the block carrying Lisa and Mark in the back seats, their wrists bound. Lisa shouted through the window, denying everything, while Mark stared at the floor, too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. The crowd watched in silence, then slowly began to clap, soft at first, then louder, like a release of breath the whole street had been holding. Inside the house, Martha sat upright in her chair, her frail hands trembling, but her eyes shining with pride. It's over, she whispered. Sarah knelt before her mother, tears breaking free. We're safe now, Mom. Upstairs, David called faintly, and Sarah rushed back to his side. His voice was still weak but steady. You saved us, he said, his eyes fixed on her with a gratitude too deep for words. You didn't let them win. Sarah shook her head, her hand covering his. No, we saved each other. You gave me hope when I had none. Emily climbed onto the bed carefully, wrapping her small arms around David's arm as if sealing a new bond. That evening, the house glowed with light for the first time. Sarah wheeled her mother into David's room, the three of them gathered together. She looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the cracked floorboards, and for once, none of it felt heavy. It felt like a beginning. Standing at the window, Sarah whispered, We fought, and we endured, and now we live. She turned to the camera's unseen audience, her eyes steady. If you've ever felt crushed by life, don't give up. Hope can be buried, but it's never gone. Hold on, fight, and when you rise, share your story. Someone out there needs it. If this touched you, leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Together, we can remind the world that even in the darkest night, light can return.